Well, good morning, and this is Thursday, so your response to your posts are due tonight, right? Talking about reading, what you read, and then Sunday night, don't forget to do one, at least one to a peer, all right? Peer-to-peer response. It's not a discussion if you don't actually talk to each other, okay? So I'm going to jump into and tell you a little bit about my reading habits. My wife and I both have been lifelong readers, all right? Um, and we of course read to our children as they were growing up, and now they're reading to their children, and they're all lifelong readers. So we have a big tradition in our family of reading. I remember my mother was a big reader. She used to read a lot of World War II books. She was always fascinated by World War II. That was her generation, okay? And I am too. I'm fascinated. I read all her books, and right this minute I'm actually reading a terrific history of the last 2 years of the war. And a lot of it took place in the areas where I was living with Susan when I was in the Army, my wife Susan, okay, when I was in the Army back in the early 70s. So it's really fascinating to me. So I like to read a lot of history. I like to read a lot of current events, political stuff. I also read a ton of fiction. I think I mentioned earlier that I just finished rereading, I'm sure for the 15th time, Lord of the Rings, the whole trilogy. Okay, I just loved it. I just, with all this stress right now about COVID-19 and employment and finances, all that, I just needed something just to totally take my mind off. So our habits of reading is we always read the last thing before we go to sleep. We get in bed and always read till we fall asleep, all right? For me, that's usually not more than 30 minutes. But I often read during the day. I love to, get a cup of coffee and get a good book. I only read on Kindle now. It's mostly because of the eyes and the lighting, all right? So I kind of miss hard copies. I miss, the feel of the book, the cover of the books. I know who I'm reading and why, that kind of thing. But I read a lot of other fiction too. I like to read fiction that kind of talks about families, that talks about people. I don't read a lot of historical fiction. I've read some, all right, but I like current novels that kind of talk about life in these times, that kind of thing. I like to read, I think most of you know by now that I used to live in China, and I used to live in Malaysia. I was teaching for Trine there for 5 years almost, and there's a lot of terrific Malaysian literature that's written in English because Malaysia is an English-speaking country. So I read a lot of Malaysian books, all right, and then China, it's a little harder, but there are some translations, and I did read some fiction, but I read a lot of nonfiction about China. China is a very, very complex country. This class actually has quite a few Chinese students in it, so I'm not telling them anything new. Very, very complex, very difficult for us Westerners to thoroughly understand. So living there, I wanted to understand it more. So I read a lot of books about China, a lot of books about the history, a lot of books about the politics. So I read. And to me, the whole point is to enjoy it, to relax, and also to learn something, all right? So I don't want to go on and on because the next discussion, I think, talks a little bit about this some more, and I want to do that too. But so don't forget, it's not a discussion unless you respond to peer, okay? So hey, hope you enjoyed listening to this.